Okay, how to read the t-table. Okay, if you look along the top here, we have DF, that stands for the degrees of freedom column, and then T subscript 0.1, T subscript 0.05, 0.025, 0.01, 0.005, and 0.001. Those are corresponding to T subscript alpha divided by 2. They give us our values for our confidence intervals, but we also need to know the size of our sample, and if we subtract 1, that will give us the degrees of freedom. Remember, the degrees of freedom is part of the function that creates the t-distribution curves. Okay, so if we wanted, say, a 95% confidence interval, that would be this column right here, 95%, because t subscript 0.025 corresponds to alpha of 0.05 divided by 2. And let's say the size of our sample was 5, then we would look at this row right here, 4 degrees of freedom, and we would use t equals 2.776. Okay, so let's suppose our sample size was 15. Then we would use 14 degrees of freedom, and the t value corresponding to that would be 2.145. Okay, but let's suppose we wanted a 90% confidence interval instead. So 90 would be alpha would be 0.1 divided by 2. It would be t subscript 0.05. So it would be this column right here. And we would also need to know the size of the sample. So let's say we have a random sample of size 25 for a 90% confidence interval. We would then have 24 degrees of freedom, and our t would be 1.711. Okay, if you look at the last row, you'll see infinity. And we know as the degrees of freedom increase and end at infinity, we have the standard normal distribution values. So that corresponds to our Z. And if you look at the column that had subscript 0.025, right, we've learned previously that for a 95% confidence interval, we use Z equals 1.96. So you can also use, for a 90% confidence interval, Z would be 1.645, and another common one would be the 99% confidence intervals. So this corresponds to 99%, would be 2.576. So only use the last row when you want Z. And when do you know you want Z? Z is when you know the population standard deviation. Okay, when you don't know the population standard deviation and you're using S, right, then that's when you need to use all these different values for T. So you find the right value by taking the size of the sample, subtract 1, and then correspond that to the proper column. If it's a 90% or a 95 or a 99, whatever the percentage is for the confidence level. So remember to always use this table for the sample standard deviation, and only use this last row when you know the population standard deviation. Okay, so we'll look at some more examples on how to use the table.